Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mechanical Muse Live, where we're going to talk about all the sorts of things that we think are cool and are fun to talk about and give you the latest updates on Cool Name Goes Here, which I know you're all waiting to hear more about. So let's go ahead and get started tonight. We have a bunch of things we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to be showing you. So starting out with the usuals. Game night update here. We're still playing Massive Darkness, almost done, but here's the coolest part. We are switching over to a full Cool Name Goes Here campaign. So not just segmented bits of testing here and there and testing out different systems and tools. We're talking about a full on, everyone makes characters when we start playing. So I'm really excited to let you guys know how that goes at the table. Again, we've playing short spurts of adventures and short one-shot adventures. We've never really started like a full-on campaign. So that should be very, very fun to see how that plays out. I'm feeling really, really excited about it. So that should be a lot of fun. Let's see, what else have I got to tell you about today? Oh, yes, some mail call. The only mail call this week were a couple more of these amazing figures. These are the retro collection. I can never get them to focus right. From Hasbro of the Star Wars toys, we have Mon Mothma. Whoops, Mon Mothma over here. But they're very cool because they're done in the style of the old figures, but they are characters that never came out in the past in this format or from the new shows like Ahsoka. So those are all very cool. Very fun mail call for today. All right, so what else have I got to tell you about? Well, I promised I'd talk just briefly about the Fallout trailer that just came out. I mean, this show looks pretty amazing in terms of its accuracy. All right, it looks just like the game. The costumes are right. The setting is right. Everything about it just looks like spot on. I mean, I guess the only thing I'd say is it's not quite as gritty. I almost feel like they need like the gritty filter on it to really make it look like Fallout. But honestly, it looks great. So if you haven't seen the trailer yet, go look for it. It's fantastic and it's super cool. And if nothing else, go check out the Vanity Fair pictures that they've got. Looks great. And I don't know how I'm going to wait till April 12th to watch this. So that's very cool. Another thing I wanted to talk about that's not gaming related. This week I was going to just talk about a book that I read that was science fiction. It took me a long time to finish this because it's like huge. It's like this thick. But it's by Kim Stanley Robinson. Now, I don't know if you know Kim Stanley Robinson. He wrote a series of books called Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars. Amazing books with very rooted in true science fiction, hard sci-fi, right? So, I mean, they've got lots of other cool stuff in it, but they're very much hard science fiction. Well, 2140 is a near future story that takes place in a flooded Manhattan after sea level rise has turned it into effectively a new Venice. And it just talks about the adventure. Now, this and some of his other books, there's another one, I think it's called 2312. Yeah. These books are what I would call experiential. So they're not going to be for everyone. You get into these books and he basically submerges you into this world, into this future setting. It's not done in the standard story format. There are bits and pieces that are thrown in, especially if you go to 2312, it goes even more out there a little bit in the format. But it's really about putting you into this world and making it real. And to me, I find that to be absolutely fascinating and unbelievably fun. Really good stories. And I mean, Kim Stanley Robinson's an amazing author. So if you like hard sci-fi, if you're willing to sort of submerge yourself a little bit into a world and like make yourself part of it, as opposed to just following along with the story and the action and make it a real place, this stuff's great. Absolutely great. Great stories, great characters, and fantastic writing. So that's what I've been up to. Watching Fallout trailers, reading Kim Stanley Robinson books, and of course, working on Cool Name Goes Here. So, of course, we've got cool name stuff. That's what we're going to start off with tonight. Cool Name Goes Here. We've got feedback from our consulting designers. And the feedback I want to talk a little bit tonight about is the feedback that we got back from Steve Long. Now, you might know Steve Long from Hero System, although he's written for pretty much, it seems like he's written for every game that exists over the years. He's absolutely an extremely prolific game designer, and it's almost certain that if you've been gaming for more than a few years and played any, more than just D&D, you've played something he's written without question, because he's all over the place. So at any rate, Steve wrote a really great set of feedback for us. I want to tell you a little bit about what he shared with us. So one of the things that we asked our consulting designers about is this whole idea of action scores versus difficulty scores, where the action score gets all the things that benefit you and the difficulty gets all the things that go against you. Was a little bit worried about that. We've had some feedback. People suggested putting them all on one side. Had some feedback where people say they just love it. It works just fine. Steve's take on it was that it really minimizes potential confusion on, does that increase the difficulty score? Does that reduce my ability? Because that is something that comes up a lot in games. And so by putting them in their own buckets, so to speak, we avoid ever wondering which side you're supposed to put something on. Now, there's still some questionable things that get a little bit tough. Like, for example, when you're wounded, it seems like you've got a negative modifier to your actions, but in reality, you're just making your actions more difficult by increasing the difficulty score. So there's still some questions there. We still need to keep play testing this to be sure that we've got it where we want it. But he did point out that he thought that worked well, is splitting those two things apart. Now, he's still not a fan of our action chart. I recognize that. I know he would prefer something different. I do believe we're going to be sticking with it because it seems to be working for folks. But yeah, he was having a little bit of trouble there. Now, something interesting that came up, and this is unrelated to the game itself, really, but it's more about how you present the materials, is he recommended that any words like action check or difficulty score be capitalized. Now, I tried to follow a capitalization scheme that was similar to what we see in a lot of WotC products, but he really suggested going a step further, where if it's a game rule or a game effect or a game element, that we should go ahead and capitalize it so it stands out from the other text. And I got to say, I think that's a pretty good idea. I actually started out that way and changed some things. So I think in the next edition that you're going to see of this version 0 or .04, you're going to see a little bit change in how we reference all of the rules. So I think that that's something that we really could make this easier to read. And that presentation is super important. In fact, that's one of the things that we're really going to be working on once we get some of the rules out of the way, is how do we present those rules in the best possible way. All right. So another thing that came up was modus operandi. I like MO. I think it's cool, but Steve made a really good point, is that he pointed out to us that it feels very modern and it kind of breaks the immersion in a fantasy setting. I understand what he's saying. I don't think he's wrong about that at all. That makes a lot of sense. He suggested maybe something like theme. So I guess what I'm putting out to all of you is, if you're watching this video, pop down to the comments and tell us what you think would work. Do you like MO? Should we be looking for an alternative? Let us know what works and what you think we should do in this case, and maybe help us to come up with a better, cool name for this so we can call it something that works better. And because he's right, it is a very modern sounding word. It would work for sci-fi, it would work for modern or near modern, but it might not be a great fit for this. So that was a great piece of advice. Interesting. And again, if you're watching, pop into the comments. Let me know what you think, because I really want to hear people's thoughts on this one. Or drop over to the Discord. You can always catch us there as well and tell us what you're thinking. Now, looking through here, Steve also noted that we have our optional rule where if your action score is equal to or greater than the difficulty score, you don't really need to roll, because that roll is effectively, that's your average roll anyway. So most of the time you're going to succeed. And so that's a decent way to quickly figure something out. He likes it. That's an option there, because we all like to roll dice. It's part of the fun of the game, right? But realistically, it's nice to have that and have it codified in a way that it's really easy for people to put 2 and 2 together and figure out, to be able to figure out when to use that rule and how to use the rule of you don't need to roll. We got a great comment from Eric. He just was saying to us that he likes the idea of capitalization to set terms apart. And I have to agree. I think it makes sense. I got a little worried that maybe I was getting carried away, and apparently I don't think I was. I think there's value there. All right. So now we start talking about this whole business of the +1 being easy to play. But Steve pointed out that we could probably do the same thing by just having a range of +1, +2, or +3 for our modifiers. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about the idea that we were sort of hoping that we could set this up so that every single modifier would be +1, right? A plus, and you never have to figure out, is this a +4? Is this a +5? What's the modifier to it? How more difficult does it make it? He does think that we could probably do that to go to a +1 or +2 or +3. It would still be relatively simple for the GM to quickly come up with it. Or we could allow the GM to come up with just sort of a broader sense of the difficulty score across the board. We're going to have to play test some more. And that was his thought, was that it's probably worth just continuing to play test and see where we land at with this one here. Now, he did talk about one of our things. We had the rule of 1. And the rule of 1 is where you can only add 1 score modifier to each type of each type to your action score, right? So it's up to GM to say, you've already got sort of a position score, so your flanking is great, but I'm not also going to give you a bonus for being slightly higher than your opponent. You get one or the other. You don't get bonuses for both of those. Not having like 8 of the same type of modifier impacting you in a situation. So he suggested that might actually make things a little complicated. And that, one thing I was thinking is maybe we can trust folks, right, to just go ahead and do that. That's something we want to think about on whether or not this is going to make things more complicated than it needs to be, right? It's one of those things that you explain how to do and you give a rule for, but maybe we don't need a rule for that, right? Another thing that he suggested is if we're looking at combat or different types of scenarios, we could have a list of areas where you could get benefit. Positioning, instead you'd have 1 positioning score, right? Now that could be a very cool, I could see that as being an awesome rules module where you could actually come up with a set of these for different sorts of encounters where you can try to gain those modifiers. Now I think you might get people who are gaming the modifier and that becomes kind of fun for them. But I do think also, that's a great example of why a rules module would be great, because it doesn't fundamentally change the game, but it gives a different style of play for someone who's really likes that sort of play. All right, going on. Meanwhile, we do still have some comments coming in. Hi, Eric. Hi, Richard. Richard points out that he's fine with MO, and I think a lot of people are so far okay with it, but we're going to have to get a little bit wider of an audience feedback on that. But yeah, he suggested theme or history. Yeah, something like that could work, right? I think theme was what Steve suggested that as well. So there might be a better word we can use. I will admit, it took me a long time to come up with MO. I spent so much time on thesaurus.com pulling up all of these words that I tried tons of them and wasn't thrilled with them. So I don't really know how that's going to work. Another thing that Steve pointed out was creativity. He hasn't really seen it done, and he's be interested to see how it comes into the game. And I think it's going to be important to provide examples, because knowing that this isn't something that has been done much, we need to give people a little bit of guidance probably on where and how to use it. And I think that we're going to have lots of ways that we'll be able to help them, guide them in using creativity. So I think a great example of this are scenarios where your character might be able to very easily come up with a plan to get you out of trouble. But you, as the player at the table, that's not how your brain works. You can't do that. That's sort of the whole point of the game like this, right? Is we can do things as our characters that we could never do ourselves. And so we might look around and, Sherlock Holmes is going to look around very quickly, identify a whole bunch of different clues and be able to assemble them together into a plan. Whereas me as a person, I might not be able to do that. And so that's where I think we can have some fun with creativity and give people the chance to role play and those types of scenarios. All right, so let me take a look here. Oh, so now we come to one of the things that I asked all of our consulting designers about, the scale of our attributes. Now, right now we have a scale about 1 to 5, where 5 is like a world-class specimen. Now, on one side of this, we have folks who told us, yeah, that's totally fine. That works. There's a lot of games that work that way. But, one of the things is that Steve has actually seen this in games where when you have a 1 to 5 scale, the characters all look a lot alike, right? There's not a lot of difference between them. And you start to feel like they're basically the same for the most part. There's not a whole lot of differentiation, at least not in their attributes. I'm not sure what to do about this one. So far, a lot of people are happy with it, and they say they like games that do that, and they think that it works fine. But this is something that obviously I've been worried about, and I brought it up, and Steve actually said if we get to even to 1 to 10, we could solve the problem. The challenge that I've got now from a design perspective is if we say scaled it to 1 to 10, would we have it where 1 to 2 is what 1 is today, and 3 to 4 is what 2 is today, and so on and so forth? It breaks also the whole system where the number is equal to the average of the dice. It also would mean then then we have 15 to 20 for what your action score is? And now we've got either large numbers or dice, or we again have to compact the scale. It's a tough question. It's going to be a tough thing to look at. So my thinking is that we're going to have to try to go forward with this 1 to 5 and see what happens. What I'd like to do is, if we find that it's making characters feel too much the same, I'd like to look at ways that we could make characters distinct and individual that doesn't involve a number on the page, because that might be a solution. Like, I don't know what that is yet. I don't know how we do that, but it is something that we need to try to look at and try to figure out how we can make this work better so we don't get that problem. That is, Steve has done this before. He's seen it in games where that literally turned into a problem. We've got to figure out how to overcome that difficulty. So whether that's a larger scale or a different way of making sure that things seem unique and special, we have yet to see. All right. I'm going to stop for a second and look at a couple of comments. We got some great comments in here. Richard pointed out that he really liked that every modifier is a +1, at least for the core rules, and that maybe +1 to +3 is add-on. I mean, that could absolutely work. Absolutely. And it looks like Doug also came in here. Hey, Doug, prefers MO and just +1. So that's interesting. It's great to hear, right? It's great to hear this, and it could still work. I want to point out one thing is that the great thing, and because I'm not quoting Steve exactly, is that Steve's feedback is very well thought out and reasoned. When he says something, he's not saying you're wrong, it's not going to work. He's saying, here's an example of where this has been a problem in the past. Here's where, as a experienced designer, I've seen people have issues. And he's offering this to us as almost a cautionary statement of, here's something you might want to think about as you move forward with this design. And I think that this is great in that respect. So just to be really clear, when we talk about any of the feedback from any of our designers, this is how they approach it. And it's actually pretty great. All right, water break really quick because I can't talk this whole time. All right, let's go on. He liked the idea of how vitality works and wound threshold, but he had some other comments about the wound system further down, which we'll get to in a second. All right. He did also like the idea of the examples. He thought those were useful, and they did a good job of illustrating how to use the different rules. I would be curious. That's going to be one of the things on our next survey, which is going to be coming up here in a little bit, is I'm going to want to hear what you guys think about some of that, because although this initial presentation of the rules is meant to just be like me telling you about how to play the game, how much of that should we hold on to? The style, the vibe, the way that we handle examples, what things worked well for you so we can bring those into the core rules when we do our final written version of them. Let's see here, familiarity versus expertise. And just taking a look. Apologize, just give me 1 second here because I lost my place on my document as I'm going through. Right. He was happy that you could choose more than one MO. That's awesome. I like that a lot. And then overall, the focus and specialization rules, he did like those. He thought that they worked really well in terms of how they add up with one another and how you can add them and break them out from the core abilities as you go through them. He also made a couple comments. He liked the suggestions and categorizations we had as well. I will say that I assembled the skill lists from like 15 different games and looked at how every one of them broke them out. GURPS, Hero, D&D, everything, and looked at how they broke them out. So I'm really glad that what we ended up with is something that we've gotten some positive feedback on. Now, he did say that our list of MOs were too focused on characters with physical abilities. He's not wrong about that, right? And you'll remember that one of the reasons is that we were starting out talking a lot about combat. Well, in this next version of the rules, combat is going to still be important, but that's not the core thing we're going to be testing. We're going to be taking a look at the way that you handle other types of scenarios and situations, other types of abilities. All right, going on from here. Oh, another example, survivalist. He suggested that that's another one of those things that sounds too modern. And I don't, he's not wrong. It's a really great point. We need to think of terms and phrasing, and that matters a lot when you're designing a game. What words are going to pull your reader out versus what words are going to work well and keep them in the mode of the adventure and the world that you're exploring. And I think those are things that we do need to look at as we go through. Oh, right. He also talked about how we could do things like if you were going to cast a spell. We start talking about initiative at this point. He talked about how if you were casting a spell, could a wizard add their intellect to their MO, for example, or their intellect MO ability, not sorry, to their MO, to their action score, right? For their initiative. These are some very cool possibilities that we can look at. I like this idea that if you're going to do a certain type of action, you can get some sort of a different sort of modifier and benefit, right? I will just jump really quick. Doug just pointed out that words can change with the genre, and that's absolutely true with Cool Name. And of course, you're welcome to change them and publish them that way if you want. But yeah, we absolutely could find ones that work for the genre that we're trying to work on. All right, player-facing roles. So, I will say that Steve was one of the people who weren't a fan of player-facing roles. I will admit that I actually really enjoyed the rolling for the monsters. It has really brought something back to the game that I was missing when we were doing it purely player-facing. I think at the end of the day, this is going to be very much a style of play issue for folks. I'm not 100% certain exactly where we'll land for the core rules, but I will say that I'm leaning towards GM rolling in combat, just because it's familiar to people. It's how people expect games to work. And I think that the player facing makes a great module. So we'll talk more about that later. All right. He liked the rule for changing initiative. You know how you can take an action to change your initiative score? We thought that was a pretty cool way to do it. Now, one of the things that also came up is we talked about that whole reliance on coordination. And he did bring up the fact that if we're giving people more options, we can rely on things other than coordination for those actions. So, for example, if I'm casting a spell, I'm not making a coordination-based attack. Perhaps I'm making an intellect-based attack at my target. Now, he also thought that the degree of success was interesting, and where if you roll after a certain amount, that causes damage. He asked if there was a non-combat or general skill version of this, and this is something that is absolutely true for a few reasons. First, we are putting together non-combat rules that allow you to use how well you rolled to impact the outcome of your skill. So perhaps it's going to make your action faster. So the more you roll above your target number, the faster you can complete the task. Or for a non-combat scenario where you're trying to trick someone or deceive them, the more that you're rolling, the more difficult it's becoming on their side as well. These are things that we're going to be able to put into place and absolutely leverage this system for non-combat. And so that's something that we're going to be working on and play testing in the next version. All right. He like a few folks, he did think dodge, parry, block score should apply to all enemies, not just to all characters, so that other people could use those. So your orc can do different things. I think that makes a lot of sense. We're probably going to go that direction based on a lot of the feedback we've been getting so far. The biggest challenge that we've had, though, let me get to the biggest challenge so far, is that he really struggled with the whole wound system in terms of how complicated it is. He felt it was overly complicated. And so what I'm considering is whether or not we drop severities for the core rules and just have straight wounds for the core rules. So severity won't matter. Wound threshold may not matter. So that's something that I'm looking to hear back from you guys on. As you're watching this later, go into the comments. I will come back and let me know what you think, or pop over to Discord and let's talk about it. Because, if Steve Long looks at this and goes, I had to read this a couple times to figure it out, it immediately tells me that, I'm going to need to rethink this, because Steve is an incredibly intelligent guy, and he's done more gaming than almost anyone else I know. And if he looked it over and went, that's a little complicated, that gives me pause. So let's think about that. How can we simplify the wound system? What can we do to make it easier? Or at the very least, how can we better present it within the game, right? And, maybe to start with, like I said, we make wound severity be like a extended rules module, where if you want something a little more realistic and it's hard to heal the wounds over time, that sort of thing, where you know, it'd be out there for folks, but it's not at the core rules. He also liked the idea he thought it was interesting about how wounds can be retreated every morning, even if they haven't healed, which I thought was pretty cool. And I was glad he liked that. And he suggested, though, like, maybe it gets easier to treat the wound every day because you're getting better at it, right? You know where the bleeding comes from, you know how to bandage it up so that it's a little bit easier every day, and it simplifies it over time. That could be very cool, right? Each time you have to bind a certain wound, it gets a little bit easier as you go along. All right. And I think, other than saying that he liked that we had the 5e conversion tools in place, and he liked that we used all of our, like, I gave them the full statistical document that gives all the stats and how they all fit together and what all the percentages are. One thing I should point out is that he also mentioned about our difficulty classes. We based our difficulty classes off the percentages that existed within the difficulty classes of 5th edition D&D. We kind of used that for our scale. And what we ended up was a scale that went from a difficulty of 12 up to a difficulty of 20. And he said he felt like there should be some more in between there. And I agree. I think there should be some more in between there. I think going from 12 to 20 is a bit much, but we were simply scaling it according to the 5th edition rule. So we're probably going to make a change to that as we go along. So that is our Cool Name RPG design journal. Very excited about the feedback we're getting. Very excited working on the new version for all of you, and we'll have that for you very soon. And I'm still working towards that goal of 1st of January having a fully playable core rule set. Now, I recognize that is coming up really fast, but I'm feeling very confident about our internal framework of rules. I feel like they're working. I feel like people are having fun with them, which is even more important. And I feel like that we've got what we need, and building this other stuff is actually the really fun part. So stay tuned, more to come. Come over, visit us on Discord, and we'll talk more about it there. All right. Now, last thing I have to talk about today is I'm going to talk a little bit about adventure writing, because if you remember, we're trying to cover more than just the cool name design, but we're covering some other things as well. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. Once I get another drink of water. It's amazing how much talking for 30 minutes straight will dry you out as you're talking. So what I want to talk a little bit about are con adventures and one-shots. And they're kind of the same thing, right? A one-shot adventure, you're going to play one night with a group of people, and then you're done. A con adventure, you're never going to play with that group of people again. It's going to be a very unique experience. So how do you make an adventure that really works for a con or a one-shot? Now, what I'm going to talk about is one of the methods I use. It's for a very specific type of adventure. It's a typical swords and sorcery fantasy adventure with a mix of combats, a bit of dungeon crawl vibe to it. It's a pretty straightforward classic dungeon adventure that you might play at any con. And it is a lot of fun, and that we've done a ton of games like this, and they've worked really well. So this is what this is based on. And I should say that today they work really well. They didn't always work well because we didn't know what we were doing at first. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we've built those adventures and what has worked for us in building out those adventures. So let me grab my notes and I will talk you through it. So again, this is the nuts and bolts of the adventure writing. It's not really about running a one-shot. Now, if I were talking about running a one-shot, I'd talk about setting expectations for the party, making sure that everyone knows that they know each other and they're friends and all of that, right? Making sure that that's all there. We're not going to talk very much about that today, but what we're going to talk about is what goes into an adventure that, in my experience, works well as a one-shot at a con. The other thing is that, like I said, it's a certain type of adventure. There are very different sorts of adventures you can play. It depends on the game, but I'm just talking about a straight up adventure. Now, this could be a dungeon. It could be in a forest. It could be in a mountain pass. Doesn't matter. This would work for any type of setting like that. but at the same time, it's not going to be a like, oh, some psychological thriller or something like that. It's not really the intent of this design. All right, so let's take a look. One of the first things that I really encourage you to have is a very clear and well-defined goal for the heroes. This is not only going to make the game easier to run, but it's going to give everyone a clear sense of where they need to go, what they need to do, and they're not going to spend an hour and a half trying to figure out why they're there. Because look, if you've got 2 to 4 hours at a con and you're going to run this game and you're going to be done at the end of it, you don't have time for people to try to puzzle out why their adventurers are even going to this place. You don't even have time to puzzle out finding it, right? It's got to be very clear. You need to go to that ruin up in the mountains, and here's the map that takes you there, and you need to try to kill the bandit king who is threatening everyone in the countryside. That's a clear, defined goal. Go up, defeat the bandit king who's threatening the whole countryside. So don't be afraid to tell the players that as well. That can come out right at the beginning. This doesn't need to be something that is hinted at. Just come out and tell them, here's what your characters need to do. So a clearly defined goal. And again, part of this is because you want to get into the fun part of the game, which is actually running around and adventuring and sneaking and deceiving and doing puzzle solving and all of that. That's what you came here to do, not to try to figure out how on earth you're supposed to win. All right, so the next thing I want to talk a little bit about is opening with action. So we've all seen James Bond movies, at least I hope you have. I guess if you haven't, go watch one. They're great. Most of them anyway. We want to open with action. And here's the reason why. If I were to hand you a replica lightsaber and told you, just hold it, don't swing it around, that would be the most torture that, like, for example, I could think of. Like, totally torture me, hand me a lightsaber, tell me I can't, like, start having a lightsaber battle with it. It's the same thing with your characters. You hand people a bunch of characters and then you don't let them use them. It can be very frustrating, right? And you can start to lose interest and people end up on their phones. Let them go straight into it. Think about a James Bond film where they have that action sequence at the beginning. So you give them their characters, you set the stage, you tell them what their goal is, and then you say, for example, that bandit king up on the cliff, you say, all right, so you've come to the town. They want you to go defeat the bandit king. So you guys head out on your way, and you're just starting up this one mountain pass when out of the bushes jump all of these bandit scouts who are watching for you, and they attack, and you start the combat. Now, you could have other types of action that would work equally well, but the point is players want to be able to use their characters right off. They want those dice hitting the table. They want to have fun and use their characters. So start rolling right away. Get them into the action right off the bat. And again, it doesn't have to be big. It should be pretty quick. It should be simple, but it should give everyone a chance to throw some dice while they're playing the game. All right. All right. Next up, let's talk about every room matters, but none are required. So look, when I say every room matters, what I mean is that you don't want a room that is pointless, right? It might be interesting, but if it doesn't tie into the overall arching story of the adventure, if it doesn't teach the players something or reward them with something valuable or give them some piece of important information, if it doesn't do any of those things, it's not going to work. So it should matter to the story that the characters are playing. However, you should be able to chop out any of those rooms and the adventure still works. And here's why. When you're dealing with a time-limited adventure, you need to be able to adjust it so that the characters can get to that finale, right? That finale matters, especially in these one-shots, because you want the satisfaction of having made it through, of done the cool thing. I mean, at the beginning, you set a clear goal. People want to get there by the end, right? So if you look at some of our adventures like the Forgotten Gate or the Temple of Modron, you can go through and chop out rooms from the middle and the adventure still works. You're still learning cool things. You're still doing cool things. But if you have to skip over a room or two, no problem. You can do that and the adventure still works. So that's a key thing, is making sure you build it out that way. Now, in order for that to work, though, there is one thing I suggest, which is a straight shot. You can do this with forest. You can do this with mountains. You can do this with dungeons. You can't necessarily do this with an open plain, although you could do a straight shot in terms of when the encounters occur. But my point here is that if you offer players options such as you can go left or you can go right, they're going to explore both directions. There's no way they're going to leave one direction unexplored unless they run out of time. And then that'll just be frustrating, because one of the things that's true about when you give people options, if you give them an option and there's no way to go back, they are more satisfied with the choice they've made than if they could go back and make a different option. So if you insist on giving like a left or right option, at least cause a cave-in to block it or something after, right? The other thing about it, though, is that choosing which direction you go, choosing between two things that you don't know very much about, isn't really a meaningful choice. All right. That's not a meaningful choice. That's just sort of like a flip of the coin. It's like, well, looks like there's some tracks this way, and it looks like it's dark that way. I don't know what either of these things mean because this is a really quick adventure and I barely know my character. I guess I'll go right. Again, straight shots work well. If you're worried about realism, cave-ins and blocked passages and things are fine. And you can always just tell the player, say, look, this adventure is really designed to take you from point A to point B if you really have to. And most everyone can play along. We don't mind. It's like when you're playing Fallout or any of the other games on your computer and you hit the edge and you're just running into the wall. You're kind of like, doesn't bother you all that much, right? So that's one of the things that I think is pretty important, is like keep a nice straight shot for the adventure. And the last thing, jumping to the finale. When you're writing an adventure of this sort and then you're running it, you need to know about how long it takes to run that final combat, that big moment, the finale where everything pays off that they've done. All the weird things they found along the way are useful. The information they've gathered, they can apply. You want to be able to jump to that finale at the perfect time. So if I have a finale that I know usually takes me about 45 minutes or 30 minutes to play out, I don't care where they are in the dungeon or where they are in their exploration. The next corner they turn, the next door they open, that's the finale room. And we start the finale right then, because that's what makes a really great one-shot experience. Not going home thinking, we didn't even get through it. I don't really know what happened. I wish I know. Or the GM just tells you the story, which is really kind of disappointing and a letdown. Let people jump to that finale and experience the full joy of having accomplished the adventure. And here's the thing about a one-shot. People can die heroically in the finale. In fact, the whole party could die as long as they get to experience that finale and potentially do it in a way that feels heroic. Even heroes lose sometimes. And the nice thing is, since you're not going to be coming back to these characters, it's okay if something bad happens to them. Just make it epic, make it dramatic, make it cool. And everyone will have a great time with the adventure, and you'll have a ton of fun, and you'll have a great one-shot or convention adventure. So that's my super quick how to have a one-shot adventure, write a one-shot adventure for your convention or for your home game. Hopefully that's useful to you. You can find more information like this in Mechanical Muse Magazine. I'm actually going to be writing this up, or mostly written up already, an article about this. We're also going to be putting out some more 5e rules soon, which includes, I have some traps that I'm going to be posting shortly. I have a new monster I'm going to be posting shortly. We're doing a bunch of cool stuff there, so you might want to check that out as well. It's our answer to the giant gaping hole left by the demise of Dragon Magazine. So folks, that's it. That's all I've got for you tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for taking some time to sit with us and talk about all this cool stuff. Make sure to keep in mind those questions I was asking and drop your comments in. I'll be watching the comments. Also, if you have things that you'd like us to talk about, let us know in the comments. I am happy to talk about any crazy, nerdy, fun thing that we get into that you want to talk about. So drop it in the comments and we can do that. Thank you again, and I hope you all have a great night and a great game.